stories. I wanted to share a few more because we have made a lot of progress. I don't want to minimize that piece. All of the work that you do every year makes a big difference. And so Central Platte has shown across their whole district they've been able to make changes to actually start to lower the amount of nitrates in their water. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the VADO sampling and what that is. But a third of the growers in that area, it's kind of similar to Patricia's number, a third have shown that they are actually reducing nitrate levels in those soils. We've improved our water productivity. That's what the little graphs are on the bottom. You can kind of see, but one's for corn, one's for soy. We get up and down with our weather, but overall, there's a trend line upwards. So if we are doing a better job of growing more with less water, and same with nitrogen, we're growing more with less. So I don't want to minimize that part, but I'm going to challenge you to say, how do we continue on that trend? How do we continue to achieve all these goals? And so to put this in U.S. context, this is a case where maybe we don't want to go big red. So this is risk for nitrates. So this is a combination of how much nitrogen is applied, what type of soils, what type of cropping systems, and then the groundwater underneath. And so Nebraska has a high risk for getting nitrates in our water, which translates to actual nitrates in water. And so this is kind of decade by decade, the trends we've seen across the state. So the first one starts back at 1981. So we go decade by decade. While we've brought levels down in the Central Platte in general, we still see this rising trend. We see larger areas of expansion as well as increasing amounts. And so this is what the most recent township average, so this isn't all the individual points, this is average by township. And so that same red kind of crescent that we saw on the first map, we are seeing that risk realized of the, in this case, anything in orange, red, or purple are above the legal limit. And we've got several others kind of on their way. And so, we first saw it in those shallower sandy soils, but it's becoming a challenge across a big portion of our high production agriculture areas. So how much does that really translate to wrap our heads around it? So the numbers were done for up in the northeast part of the state, but it's a similar saturated thickness on the aquifers. I think the number would be very similar. So an acre foot of water, which is how like people that manage Lake McConaughey talk in acre feet. And so that's about a football size field that's a foot deep. And so you can think about the water in the aquifer beneath our feet contains about 12 acre feet of water in that area. And so in this part of the state, we've got 7 parts per million. Here, it's probably about half of that. And so that translates to 578 pounds of nitrogen under each acre. So we can view that as, that's a lot of dollars that we sunk into the aquifer. But we can also flip that on its head and say, well, that's something that if we use it wisely, we can recycle that back through our irrigation systems and use it to our advantage as well. So that's only part of the challenge. There's also a lot of nitrate on its way to the groundwater. So if you haven't seen this before, what we call the unsaturated part of the soil, so you got the root zone, is the first part. That's the part that we monitor for how much irrigation application we want and all that, because that's where our roots of our crops can get to it. But the entire unsaturated zone is the soil from the surface all the way down to where the water table is. So in some places that's fairly shallow, it might be 20 feet. Other places it might be 300 in this unsaturated zone, which is also called the VADO zone, the lab guy's term for what we call that. And then also, as we think about it, all of this is flowing kind of sideways. Actually, it's this way in this part of the state, so it roughly follows the slope of the land. So if you've seen a map of Nebraska to scale, like the one at the state fairgrounds, we actually have a fairly steep slope. The whole state is kind of on a tilt. And so the groundwater roughly flows at its kind of more northeast to southeast in general. There's, around rivers and stuff, it changes. But so what happens on the crop surface, as it rains and it moves, it slowly is moving off of where you applied it on someone else's field. Around Hastings, it's like about a quarter of a mile per year. And so, over 10 years, you've moved several miles. What you applied is now off onto someone else's. But it's not super fast. It's not like it's instantly across everyone. So, this is kind of a slow progression. But, so what we do on those samples, really briefly, is you take a core and then you sample how much nitrogen, and we do a bunch of other soil tests, all the way from the land surface down to the water table. Around Hastings, we could get to 65 feet everywhere, so it's kind of normalized from that. So in that unsaturated zone, we've got about the same amount of nitrogen on its way to the aquifer. So it's about 520 pounds under each acre. This is in the Hastings wellhead area. It varies depending on how the land is managed. And so unfortunately, like I said, only a third of those sites went down, 2/3 went up. And so it's not a problem we've solved. We're still increasing the amount of nitrate being sank into the soil. So it's gone up 30% between, these were done 2011 to 2016. So in that 5 years, it went up, unfortunately, on 2/3 of the sites. So overall, it went up 30%. And so what does that turn into? That turns into an ever-increasing number of wells that are impacted. And so this is one of the critical reasons why we care, which I'll get into next, is just that this does start to impact more and more people. Here I pulled out for this district. In many of the sub-areas are approaching half of the wells being impacted above the safe threshold. So one thing I find as we talk about this, I grew up with water that I remember when it went over 10 parts per million and when I was growing up. But yeah, we were kind of, we made sure that when my mom was pregnant, she didn't drink it. The rest of us were, what does this matter? So I think that's fairly common sentiment. We've been tackling this for a long time. It feels old. Oh, haven't we dealt with this already? So let's think about why we should care today. And I won't belabor this because what Patricio hit on, just displayed a little bit differently. These come from the Lower Niobrara, which he had in his boat. What's nice, my colleague at Lower Niobrara sent me, well, he presented this last month. He calculated the numbers, so I hope you can see those. So this is on average, and so you remember from Patricia's, there's a wide range. Some people are doing better, but on average, on corn, we're applying over $25 per acre in excess. And so when you start to look at per pivot, that turns into real dollars and cents. There's definitely people on both ends of the spectrum. So up in that district, they found, again, it's around that 2/3, 1/3 number, about 2/3, a little over of their fields are getting more nitrogen than they really need. So in Upper Big Blue, I checked the most recent report, so from 2018, it was very similar numbers, 20 to 40 pounds over. And then a lot of times this is, done as risk. It's kind of a risk management. You want to make sure crop's not short, but that has real implications both in dollars personally and then as it moves off site. So same thing on yield. Again, you're getting pretty much the same yield across a huge range of amounts of water. Up in that district, they had people applying 5.4 all the way to 31 inches of rain, inches, and this is on pivot, so they're basically flood irrigating with pivot, and that has big implications for the amount of energy used, and so dollars per pivot when we start to think of if you could get the same yield down at that lower level, you save real dollars and cents. The big one, so there's a safety threshold for a reason. We've heard probably about blue baby syndrome. That's the only one that I knew of kind of growing up. Because that's a definitive link. We know very very for sure, too much nitrates. You shouldn't have infants drink. But what's been really interesting is the research has developed over the last 5 to 10 years is that this is a full life challenge. And so there are statistically significant links to several things that impact us at all ages. And so colorectal cancer is the highest linked. This study from this summer said that they attribute somewhere between 2,000 and 12,000. It's a big range because it's hard to attribute these things. But a very large number of cases of colorectal cancer specifically to excess nitrates in our groundwater. Thyroid disease, particularly hypothyroid, which I know a lot of people with hypothyroids and like, oh, maybe I need to pay more attention to this. And then negative birth outcomes, which can be everything from preterm birth to birth defects. And these are for the whole U.S. Although, like it's on the map, a big chunk of that comes from here. So what they estimated was, oops, shoot, this is temperamental. Okay. And so that turns into, as a society, some of those being possibly us in this room, this is a really large expense, health expense. And so there's personal cost to how it is, and then there's cost as this goes out into the environment. And so this is each year, and health care keeps going up every year, so obviously these get to be very large numbers when you're talking cancer. And so specifically here in Nebraska at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, they're digging into that first map is, let's see, well, you can't really see that, but you can see the red. Another time, we don't want to go big red. This is pediatric cancer incidence. We're really stand out for this part of the country. We're the only one outside of New England that is in that highest category of pediatric cancer incidence. So they've been digging into this at UNMC. One of the pieces they're really looking at the water. And so they did this study that's on the right, which looks at by basin, where do these things kind of fall out. And so we have an actively ongoing birth outcomes in water, so that's the birth outcomes piece. And then there's another group of our medical faculty looking at pediatric cancer, which is a view, pediatric cancer is kind of a signal for also later in life cancer. So they're really trying to dig into what are causing these, how do we get out and tackle this as a state. So while it's, this is where it gets a little bit messy in science, but when you start to talk statistical significance, you really need to start paying attention. It's not something that's just blue baby and then the rest of us don't have to worry about it. And one of the layers that gets added onto this is some other research done at UNL showed that one of the key challenges is that nitrates mobilize, which means it releases it into the water, naturally occurring uranium. And so we have a lot of uranium in our soils, but usually it stays locked up there when there gets to be high levels of nitrates. They're not totally sure how the chemistry works. They think it's a microbiology process, but it releases that uranium into water. You don't want to be drinking low levels of uranium on a regular basis. So we have actually several cities, including Hastings, that part of their treatment is also to remove those radioactive components, which really increases the cost of treatment, because then as you get rid of that, you concentrate it, and now you have to, their wastewater, so far it's below the threshold, but if it gets higher, it can be considered a radioactive waste, and then you have to pay to dispose of it in radioactive facilities, and so, very challenging layer added onto this. So, I would argue that has a lot to do with our community vitality. So as we start to think about what these costs mean per person, so in a city like Hastings, what they've implemented so far, like I said, if levels continue to go up, this number will have to go up, but what they have so far is taking care of it, clocks in at $60 a person per year. So that's every year their ratepayers have to cover that. And then when you start to get to really small communities, how many are on private wells? I would guess most people. Or do we have anybody that's on rural water, like a small town water system? Everybody lives in, I do too. I have a private well. But for a really small town, so once you have to have a public water supply, you're obligated to treat that water so that it's below 10 parts per million. It gets really expensive because these systems, you have to have professional operators. So if you can imagine a town of 50 people and they have to hire a professional water operator, it gets to be really untenable so it's like, okay, so do we just put point of use systems on everyone's? But those are still pretty expensive in comparison to these community systems. And so point of use is what you put under your sink. So it's only treating your drinking water. These are still pretty expensive per person. And I put the numbers on there since we buy fertilizer per pound in agriculture. You know, we buy it at 30 to 50 cents per pound. But then when you have to clean it up once it gets out there, it's expensive to pull the stuff back out. I mean, so you don't want to be losing it into a system where you have to treat it because it just becomes very expensive to maintain. And then another piece of it, when we start to talk quality of life in Nebraska, we like to enjoy our water. You know, so we go out to our lakes. Many of our lakes are impaired. We got 83% is the latest number. Not all of those are for harmful algal blooms, but if you've heard those in the news, those are the ones you don't want your dog in the water, it'll make them sick. As people, you can't contact it, it gives you rashes and everything. So those algal blooms, either the harmful ones or just regular algal blooms that make fisheries more difficult. Those are driven by nutrients, both phosphorus and nitrates. So on mostly talking about nitrates, it's also a phosphorus issue. So those have ripple effects in our local economies. If you can imagine some of our larger lakes being put on, worst case scenario would be over Memorial Weekend to have some of our big lakes have harmful algal bloom, then all the people who wanted to go there, they cancel their trips, and then that ripples out to our tourism companies. So, knowing that we're making progress, but we have some work to do, let's think about how do we get there. I'm gonna leave the actual practices to Keith, and he knows a lot more about the details, so bear with me. Hopefully you don't mind kind of this more overarching view of why we might look into different practices. And so I would argue what we're all after, we might have different ways to get there, but if we really look at the values of what we're after in this state, we're trying to balance how do we have good quality of life, how do we continue our rural legacy, people on the land, how do we have thriving rural communities which have schools and have grocery stores and all these things that we want to have in our communities, while at the same time growing food for a hungry world. And water is central to all of those pieces. And so how we get there might be a challenge, but if we can remember we're all trying to get to these same things, I hope that can ground our discussions on how do we move forward as a group to do these things. I very much appreciate, and I'll bring up the economics is a key part of it, but that's only one piece of it. So when you have huge impacts in your local community, it's the other farmers who show up to harvest the guy's acres when he had an accident and can't do it. That's your local community. And global markets can't capture that piece of it. And so there's things that are monetized in the market and there's things that aren't. And the only people who are going to take care of these other things are us here in the room, really trying to work on some of these other values. So when we think about how do we go about changing, so this is any change in our life, there's different drivers for how we decide to do this. So at the basic level, and where we like to think, in an altruistic world, everything would align with our values. We could do only the things that we wanted to do, or things that we view negatively. So this was it's an interesting. I could always smoking as an analogy because it used to be very socially popular and people thought it was cool. So that's kind of your next level up. But we thought it matched our values, what we wanted to do. We enjoyed it. And then again at the social level, this is kind of again with smoking. It used to feel cool, but now maybe it's not. And so there's different ways to think about this when we're in agriculture. What do we talk about at the coffee shop? We like to talk about yield, but how do we make cover crops cool or something like that? And then a lot of experts, we have to make dollars and cents even out at the end of the day. And so economics force us to do things that we have to do to stay in business. And so there's ways that you can use that. So whether it's incentive programs, so this is NRCS incentive programs and energy incentive programs, are there labeling programs that we could tie into? And then on the negative side, we can flip to higher costs. It's that piece of we probably shouldn't put 32 inches of water on, one because of the water use, but then there's a real dollars and cents economic loss to inefficiently using that water. And then the one that we don't want to use, but sometimes we end up there, is in that force category. So these are things like regulation, which is never popular, zoning regulations. They put in positive in the study. I'm like, well, I think it depends on who you talk to, whether you think zoning is positive. Or ultimately in litigation, do you end up in the courts? And so hopefully that doesn't happen, but how do we drive it towards what the changes are matching up to what our values really are? And so, how we do these things, there's these are the ones that I can think of that we're hitting on, and there's obviously some pieces that are missing. So a lot of our educational events help us think about, well, how do we know how to do it, and how does this match up with what my goals are on my operation? So education kind of really fits into that bottom one. The social one, we have, there's a few programs that we do that kind of engage us more socially, and I think we're thinking about how do we do that more. So there's citizen science projects going on further east in the state. There's things like just signage that says, hey, this is something we're doing. That's a social cue to say this is something we find important. There's some educational games that are being developed on campus so that we get students involved with playing with each other to learn about things like agriculture and water and how do they work together. And then there's some parts of the state that form watershed groups. And I would argue natural resource districts fall, so having open public meetings and having publicly elected officials, that's a social component to how we talk about managing water in our state. And then in economic, there's just, the base, what are we getting paid? I think that drives a lot of the decisions that we make on the farm. But are there other ways that we can incentivize? So we know we want to achieve these goals. How do we find ways in the marketplace to incentivize that? So that could be labeled programs. There's some parts of Illinois and Iowa, they're trying to implement through their Ag Business Association, the right time, right place, you've probably seen it, those type of campaigns. And can you tie that back to something like a field to market, where you can get market incentives then, because those companies can say that we've done this thing and that we're doing a good job. And so there's other sorts of programs. So how do we get the money flowing back to the farmers for doing these things that we as a society deem important? NRCS is and the energy incentive programs are very long-standing examples of incentives. And then finally, we all know about regulation. We don't always like it, but when might it be useful? So I want to walk through this kind of messy, this is my messiest graphic. But I want to spend a little bit of time. This theory comes out of a long-standing educational theory, and particularly in the tech world, they talk about this stuff a lot. And so you may not be able to read those, so I'll walk through it. But what this says is, as a population of people, so if you view those as numbers of people, most of us are in the middle. And the thing to think about with this is, we all, in different parts of our life, fall into different categories of how quickly we want to adopt a given idea. So I was kind of a middle-of-the-road person on smartphone adoption, but I was way out on the leading edge. I love social media, but yet I still take all my notes in a notebook, and so I'm a way late adopter. for students at least, like all my peers were taking their notes on their tablets and all that. I still prefer a notebook. And so, as you think about different parts of your life, you're not always stuck in a box. But this is with any given idea or any given technology. We can think about no-till, how it went about water sensors, any ag tech falls into this. And so the people out on the left, these are the people who love technology. They buy a drone not knowing what they're going to do with it because they want to figure out something. They love the tech, and they have the latest apps. They want to try out the apps. So these are the people you can put in there as their technophiles. They love technology. They love to innovate. And so they tend to kind of be the leading edge. There's a lot of risk out there. They might spend all that money and not get any return on it. So part of this has to do with how much risk there is. But those, so there's people that love to do it just because it's new and novel, but yet then there's a gap. So how do we prove that it's a social good? This is something that'll make me money. This is something that is good for my community. That's kind of the social proof idea when you get to the rest of us. Like, how do we know we want to adopt it? And so I would argue from our previous one, these people who really want to do it, it matches their values because they love technology or they really like what this idea will do for conservation on their land, so that it matches my land ethic, or there's many value-driven reasons why they'll do this. But to get the larger group, I think these are social, what are the social things that we can bring to bear? These are things that we as a society deem as social norms and things that we should do. There's economic drivers that will force us to change. Not all of us in agriculture go into technology because we want to. We have to. It's kind of keeping up with the Joneses economically, because that cost of production keeps ratcheting down. So economics can drag us into new ideas. And then is there a place for regulation and litigation? Is it to bring up that tail? And I think that's a question. I'm not here to answer that question, but when you think about how you engage with your NRD, with your state legislature, what is the place? Is there any place for regulation and litigation when it comes to social good? We're talking about, so this is why we're a democratic society and have civic engagement, is that we have to hash out these things of what does it look like to move forward as a society. And then we can more specifically start to evaluate all our individual ag practices. There's probably 20 different ones that have positive or sometimes negative impacts on water quality, water quantity. And so how do we evaluate those in a way that ties back to all of this? So I think this is something I want to do, and I haven't done yet. Maybe next year I can bring the numbers. But so if you look at any given practice, it has a cost. It has a cost to implement it. It has a cost in a learning curve. It has a cost in your time. And so those fall out kind of on the upper part. And then how well does it work for a given goal? So if our goal is to reduce the amount of nitrates in our water, for that practice, so cover crops, since we're talking a lot about soil health today, for cover crops, where does that land? And I think, for stuff that's kind of middle of the road or low-hanging fruit, those middle economic, social, and internal drivers will help most of that stuff fall out. But if there's things that work really well and they're low cost, maybe that is where regulation falls into place. I don't think you want to use it on something that doesn't work very well, or it only works in certain circumstances. But if we've got some low-hanging fruit, is that maybe the place where regulation comes into play? And then on the flip side, if it works really well, but the cost isn't there yet, as a society, is that where we throw in incentive programs? So we use, we take all of our taxes, put them into NRCS programs, and we incentivize it because we as a society deem that as a very effective practice, and so we want to spend the money to get the water quality improvement. And so, from a process standpoint, so that's kind of individually how do we tackle it. and think through it. I want to talk about how do we build this larger structure, because while I firmly believe that almost all my friends and family I know that are farmers really want to do all of the things. You can't always do all the things because of how the different incentive programs work, how USDA works, how the markets work. Those larger system drivers don't always lend it towards an easy choice to achieve our water quality goals. So can we drive this from a larger perspective to say what do we need to do to make the system work for our goals? And so how we're approaching this at the Water Center is we really want to get all the sectors in the same room. And so these are people, so conservation groups that already have a water focus, those of us on campus, those of you in the room. So this is an open invitation for if you're interested in participating. We're going to be launching this next year. Private industry, so our ag business, ag retail, cooperatives, and then our state, federal agencies, and natural resource districts here in the state. So how do we work together? So we're using a process that's called collaborative impact. It's been used for about 10 years as a way to get these large multi-sector groups together and really structure how do we work broadly across all of us. And it's kind of elegant in its simplicity that it's got 5 goals or 5 pieces of it that you do to have success. So first is you decide what are your common goals. So this is agreed upon by the group. What's the overarching goal? And so, this is a big goal that we can build kind of homegrown solutions to get to that goal. This isn't like prescriptive, everybody needs to do X, Y, Z. This is what's our goal as a state in our case. And then that leaves it open to how do we get there. And then we need to actually measure it. Are we making progress? And so agreeing upon how we're going to measure progress, and then working together towards those goals so the different sectors reinforce the message and reinforce what's happening to work together. And that happens by having communication amongst those all the different people work together. And then what they call a backbone organization is who convenes the meetings, who evaluates the metrics and shares back the reports. So that kind of base organization is that last piece. And so on campus, we've already done this over the last year. We got together a nitrate faculty group. We thought we'd maybe get 30 people, and we got 50 people in person, about 80 people that are up on this graphic. And so we're a large group as well. So how do we organize across all these different sectors to work well together? So we're kind of doing this internally first. And this is a point where I was reminded to put in a pitch for these faculty are here to help serve your needs and interests. And so if some of the different practices or some of these different things are of interest to you, we have a lot of these are extension faculty that can help you do on-farm research. So talk to your local county educator, and you can do some statistically validated tests at your field scale on your actual property. And so definitely get in touch with them. They're here to help serve you. And so we're working on how do we have research and extension programming that works together. And then this is not designed to be able to read, so don't try to read it. But the idea being, so this is up in the northeast part of the state, where there's kind of a really active hub of water quality focus in the Brazil groundwater management area. So the dark blue are those different sectors. And so there's state agencies, federal, tribal, nonprofit, academia, and the communities all represented. And the green are the different projects they're doing. So this is the idea of the mutually reinforcing activities. So we have lots of projects going, but how do we communicate and coordinate so that we're all kind of working towards the same goals? With that, I will end my piece of it to say, I heard this combination when talking about watershed management, and it just really resonated, is that we need both urgency and persistence. We've been talking about nitrates for a long time, so it's really easy to feel like we don't need to be urgent in the here and now. But I think particularly the health drivers and the dollars associated, this is something we need to address today, knowing that this will be, it's been decades in the making, it will be decades in the